enjoyed both. You really, really should purchase this book, not just for everybody in this packed house, but for all the viewers out there, because I know Erick is a gifted and talented writer. He speaks the EMET, he speaks the truth. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to a great writer.
Well, thank you for coming out tonight. First of all, I want to thank my good friend Sarah Stern. I consider Sarah a modern-day Deborah for our times, for such a time as this. And I've said it before, and I have to tell you, EMET, the Endowment for Middle East Truth. Look, folks, I'm here in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. I get to see what EMET does up close, what Sarah does up close, the tireless work for Israel, for America on Capitol Hill, where it really counts. They are making a difference. So everyone at home as well, check out emetonline.org. Great, great, important organization. And look, I have to give everyone here credit for coming out tonight. You know, there's easier, more soothing things and relaxing things to do after a long day of work than coming to hear about ISIS. You know, God bless my wife, and she's here someplace in the room. I see her in the back, I think. You know, we talk about this issue, we talk about ISIS, and this is my third book, and every night when my head hit the pillow writing this book over about a 5-month span, it was very condensed, I'd be thinking about ISIS. And I'd have to share it with someone. How about my significant other? Beheadings, burnings, lighter fare. Keeping the marriage together. But I would say to her, Lori, would you rather know or not know at the end of the day? And she said, I'd rather know. But you're sleeping on the couch tonight. So without further ado, folks, thank you so much for coming, first of all. Secondly, I want you to know what I'm going to focus on tonight. I really want to take it. We're in America. We're in the United States. I really want to focus here on what ISIS, its supporters, its sympathizers are doing here on American soil. I think that's very important. Look, a lot of times Americans today are kind of zoned out. Hey, the Kardashians are on the tube. Hey, the game's on. Someone just texted me. I'm guilty of that too. Maybe not the Kardashians. But the rest of it I'm guilty of, I admit. But look, the way you get people's attention in our great country is to make it real and immediate and to let them know it's in their backyard. A lot of times Americans say, look, why should I care about what happens in the Middle East thousands of miles away? It doesn't affect me. Well, I'll give you an example how it does affect all of us right here in the United States. Just last month, recently, the FBI Director James Comey made a very stunning statement. He said that in all 50 U.S. states today, we have a network of ISIS supporters and sympathizers. The FBI Director said that in all 50 states in the Union, we have investigations ongoing right now into ISIS-related activity. So folks, what the FBI Director was saying is that the barbarians are not just at the gates, they're inside the gates. We're going to get into that tonight. But let's start with a quick overview of ISIS and this Islamic State that's wreaked so much havoc throughout the Middle East and throughout the world over the past year. Look, right now ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, controls some 35,000 square miles of territory in the very heart of the Middle East. That's an area the size of Great Britain. Astounding. JV team, mind you. We'll talk about that briefly. 35,000 square miles in the middle of the Middle East. And they declared a caliphate. An Islamic State. This is the great dream of every Islamic jihadist group, from the Muslim Brotherhood to Al-Qaeda to ISIS and so on and so on. Now, they go about it in different ways. The tactics differ, as we'll discuss. But at the end of the day, folks, remember, the end game is the same. The caliphate and Islamic Sharia law for one and all, whether you like it or not. So they declared a caliphate. The caliphate has returned. And it's made out ISIS more than just a terrorist group. It's made them a global phenomenon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not Al-Qaeda or Hamas, and that's bad and that's lethal enough. ISIS, again, has declared a state in a pivotal part of the world. Not only that, they have 30,000 to 40,000 well-trained, fanatical foot soldiers. Basically, they have a standing army. And they're global. The CIA Director John Brennan said recently that ISIS recruits are coming from 90 countries around the world, including the United States. 90 countries. And American airstrikes have not stemmed the flow. The flow of jihadists from every corner of the globe continues. They're circuiting through our friend and ally, Turkey, many times. I say that with air quotes when I talk about Turkey being a friend and ally these days. But it's happening. This is a global phenomenon. This is a movement. Jihadists around the world have galvanized. The caliphate has been declared. And here in the West, in the United States, some 180 U.S. citizens have left their comfortable existences in the most prosperous country in the history of the world. They've gone to the caliphate. Some 3,500 Western Europeans, at least. That number is probably much higher. But according to most estimates, at least 3,500 Western Europeans, Brits, French, Germans, Swedes, Danes, have left comfortable Western Europe and traveled to the caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And ladies and gentlemen, here's the key point about that for everyone watching here in America. If they don't get killed, these Westerners waging jihad overseas, one day they will return home. These are U.S. citizens, U.S. passport holders. And when they return home, fresh off sawing off someone's head in the Middle East, they're probably not going to transition peacefully back into civilian life, maybe get a job at a gas station. No. The jihad will come here. ISIS right now is calling on its followers. They're saying, hey, come to the caliphate, establish this utopian Islamic society. But it's also a good thing if you stay put. In Chicago, New York, London, Berlin, ISIS calls them city wolves. City wolves. And they're telling them to rise up on American soil. You can be a one-man jihad in your own backyard. Think of Fort Hood. Think of the Boston bombings. Think of Paris back in January 2015. Look, folks, in Paris, perfect example of what I'm talking about. Two well-armed jihadists, brothers. They had trained in Yemen with Al-Qaeda. They returned home to France, and they wreaked havoc. Killed 17 people. Among those 17 was not coincidentally a number of Jews at a Jewish deli. They were targeted because they were Jews. Make no mistake about it. It was not a coincidence. 17 people killed by two well-armed jihadists, captured world attention, dominated the global media cycle for the better part of a week, inspired a massive anti-terror march in Paris, which President Obama skipped. Message sent. Ladies and gentlemen, translate what happened in Paris here to American soil. Do you really think it can't happen here? Did we not see the Boston bombings in May 2013? Again, brothers, two well-armed, well-trained terrorists to a degree, actually relatively amateurish. In all, killed 4 people, wounded over 200 more, and again, captured the global media cycle, and even more importantly and more chilling, I think, for us, a major American city, the city of Boston, was shut down for the better part of a week. 2 men were able to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, think of the Mumbai attacks. In November 2008, they ruined a lot of our Thanksgivings that weekend when 10 well-trained terrorists, young, these guys were in their early 20s mostly, even one I believe in his late teens. They fanned out across the city of Mumbai, one of the largest cities in the world. Millions of people live there in India. Fanned out with assault rifles and bombs in their backpacks. And they wreaked absolute havoc. They laid siege to one of the world's largest cities. Just 10 men. with assault rifles and some bombs, laid siege to one of the world's biggest cities. For the better part of the week, again, the media cycle was completely dominated by this. They killed dozens and dozens of people. Could you see that in, God forbid, Middle America? Because that's the goal. And I'm not an alarmist, I'm not a sensationalist. This is what ISIS is saying. They are calling, again, on Americans to rise up and be city wolves, in their words. Folks, the game plan and the strategy for ISIS, I outlined it in the book, is to turn the United States and Western Europe into guerrilla war zones, where you're seeing a Fort Hood style attack, a Boston bombing style attack, a Paris style attack on American and European soil on a regular basis. We had an inkling of that in October 2014. A sequence of events, actually beginning in late September 2014 and ending in October. A sequence of events beginning in late September 2014 when an ISIS sympathizer in rural Oklahoma, of all places, beheaded his co-worker, a grandmother. Now, on his Facebook page and in his online ravings, he spoke in favor of 9/11, pro-Al-Qaeda, pro-ISIS, pictured giving the ISIS one-finger salute. Yet, the FBI deemed it workplace violence at the end of the day. Sounds familiar. I believe there was something happened at Fort Hood a few years ago. It was also a case of workplace violence, so I'm told, and so our government said. This poor woman, a grandmother in rural Oklahoma, was beheaded by an Islamic radical. And it went on. In the ensuing weeks, we saw in Ottawa, Canada, one lone jihadist stormed the Canadian Parliament, where the Prime Minister often is in Canada. Then we had a hatchet-wielding jihadist madman, ISIS sympathizer, attack a group of New York City police officers with a hatchet. Again, a city wolf. That was in the span of about 3 weeks in the fall of 2014. ISIS wants to create a situation on American soil, ladies and gentlemen, where you're looking over your shoulder. I'll give you a great example, a chilling example. In Sydney, Australia, down under, in September 2014, an ISIS plot was broken up, a plot devised by ISIS supporters. What they wanted to do was randomly kidnap someone off the streets of Sydney, Australia. Some poor soul with a cup of coffee in his hand, walking to the bus, doing his morning commute. They planned to kidnap him and saw his head off, or her head off, for the cameras. A great propaganda victory. Thankfully, it was broken up. But again, this is the definition of terror, where you never know what's going to hit you, when it's going to hit you, or who's going to hit you. But rest assured, when they do hit you, God forbid, they'll probably be shouting Allahu Akbar. And by the way, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to walk into a shopping mall, yell Allahu Akbar, and start firing. It really doesn't. And if the FBI director, his words, not mine, his words, if he's saying that we have a network of ISIS sympathizers and supporters in all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, then we have serious trouble here. It's a big problem. And again, I'm not being an alarmist, because I've done my homework. I've done the research. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. I've documented in the book. You want to know about ISIS recruiting, how they're attracting Americans? Well, I have a chapter in the book called The Islamic State of Minnesota. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, but kind of not. I spent time on the ground over the years in Minnesota, and look, in the frozen tundra of the upper Midwest. A great place to live. A prosperous state, very high quality of living, a beautiful place. But the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, of all places, have really become jihad central in the United States. People at home and people in this room are probably shaking their heads and saying, Minnesota? You know, I can see New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minnesota? Yes, Minnesota. Minnesota has the largest Somali Muslim population in all of North America. At least 100,000 Somali Muslims live in the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. That's going to shock a lot of Americans to hear that. Look, not every Somali is a terrorist, obviously, but we have a serious problem in that community here in the United States with Islamic radicalism. Dozens of Somali Muslims, U.S. citizens, by the way, who live in the Twin Cities, have traveled overseas over the past few years and joined terrorist groups like ISIS. More than any other state, city in the entire country, Minnesota, and in particular that Somali Muslim population. Now, the reason that alarms me is, number one, they may return home, well-trained, fanatical. We had a threat just a short time ago by a Somali terror group called Al-Shabaab, linked to Al-Qaeda, calling for attacks on the Mall of America in Minneapolis, the largest shopping mall in the country. And if you have that large radicalized population living within the shadow of that shopping mall, you may have a problem. Dozens, that's astounding, dozens of U.S. citizens from the same metropolitan area have gone overseas to join terror groups, the worst of the worst, ISIS. Now, folks, that alarms me also because, look, it seems to be following the European model. And I document in the book the horrific problems Western Europe is having. In Britain, France, Germany, Sweden of all places, where a large number of Muslim immigrants are coming to these countries. And they're not assimilating, and they're not integrating. And they're forming almost self-segregating type societies. I know because I've walked in these neighborhoods and I documented in the book. It's happening. The Europeans have not encouraged assimilation. They've encouraged multiculturalism and for new arrivals to keep their culture. It sounds great in theory, but in practice, it's disastrous. And if we go down that road here in the United States, we have big problems. And I fear that we're seeing that to a degree. And again, I'm not trying to paint a broad brush. I've met a lot of good Somali Muslim community leaders who have worked with me on this issue, given me great information and kind of walked me through what's going on. But if we have serious problems in that community with assimilation and integration, we got to be on top of it. We can't have droves of people from an American community joining terror groups. We just can't. I spoke to a law enforcement source. Very plugged in guy, on the ground, worked for years and years in the city of St. Paul. And I asked him how the recruitment process works. I think this is one of the most fascinating aspects of the book, and frankly, a chilling but an eye-opening discussion. He told me, Eric, this is how it works. A jihadist recruiter, usually a young guy, young enough that he can still relate to teenagers. Hip enough, I guess you would say, that he can still relate to teenagers. He'll come into a mosque, or he'll come into a rec center, or wherever there's 18, 19, 20-year-old kids hanging out. And first, he'll befriend them. Then the radicalization process starts. And the bill of goods that these ISIS recruiters will sell a young kid in the United States is, look, if you come to the caliphate, if you come to the Middle East, Iraq and Syria, join ISIS, be part of our grand Islamic State, you will be at the vanguard of the new Islamic empire. You will be a rock star in the Middle East. Everyone will know your name. You'll be a glorious holy warrior. To an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid fresh out of high school, might not have a job yet, it can be an appealing message. Can be an appealing message. It's working, it's resonating. And the main way ISIS is doing this, yes, there's the on-the-ground aspect, where the recruiter according to my sources on the ground in Minnesota, will actually take the kid, brainwash them, radicalize them, make sure they get to the airport to make it to Syria, make sure they have money in their pocket, make sure they're in contact with a fixer on the ground, usually in Turkey, and they transit through Turkey into Syria. And they're part of the blessed caliphate. Holy warriors, dedicated to destroying the country that gave them everything, where they were born and raised, in many cases, the United States. How is this happening other than on the ground? 2 words, folks: social media. ISIS, as I said in the beginning of our talk, is a different beast in many ways. It's a global phenomenon. But ladies and gentlemen, the way they're using social media is unprecedented. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. ISIS and its supporters around the world send out 90 tweets per minute. That's astounding. 90 tweets per minute. And their social media operations are run by Westerners. In particular, one American who was raised in the Boston, Massachusetts area of all places, was a Dean's List student at Northeastern University. He now reportedly runs ISIS's propaganda arm. And that propaganda arm not only is targeted through social media, obviously, but films, the power of film, of video. ISIS has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars making these slickly produced propaganda videos. And they have the production values of a Hollywood action flick in some cases. It's really astounding if you look at ISIS's propaganda. Folks, long gone are the days of Osama bin Laden in a cave, standing against a green screen, droning on in Arabic for an hour. That's done. ISIS is on the cutting edge. And they're Westerners who control this propaganda arm, and they know how to directly speak to a Western English-speaking audience. They can reach out and touch them through the web. And they're having a great effect. I think another aspect to this, because we in this room, and hopefully most people, if not everyone at home, sees what ISIS is doing, the barbaric savagery, and we're repelled by it. This is evil. Yes, evil exists. But there's a segment of people in the West right now, ladies and gentlemen, who see what ISIS is doing, beheading, raping, pillaging, enslaving, and they're attracted to it. You know, in our culture, over the past few decades, we've had, violent video games where kids are chopping heads in their bedroom. We have movies with gory, horrific violence and realistic torture scenes in a lot of our films, and our kids are filling their heads with this. And I believe that there is some desensitization going on. Hey, he's just chopping a head. I just did that last night. And I'm not trying to be flip about it, but when your culture is kind of poisonous with that kind of thing, hey, ISIS is a product, they're made for these times in many ways. Medieval ideology and tactics wedded with 21st century technology. Folks, that's a lethal mix. That's a lethal mix. And it's highly effective. Unprecedented, really. So you have the on-the-ground recruitment. You have the online recruitment. I'll give you another chilling story about how the online recruitment works. One of the nastier sides of ISIS, obviously, is the way they treat women. Total subhuman oppression. Yet, in a strange way, and on the flip side, we're seeing more and more Western women travel to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. Young girls as young as 14, 15 years old, from places like Austria, Britain, France, Germany, going to join this caliphate. I was stunned in the fall of 2014. If I reference the fall of 2014 a lot, it's because that's when I wrote the bulk of the book. I was a very busy man. But in the fall of 2014, I spoke at a large church, pro-Israel church, out in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. And they told me a chilling tale. They said, Eric, a few months ago, they said, you're writing a book about ISIS. Well, boy, do we have a story for you. A few months ago, a woman was coming to our Sunday services. Every Sunday, dressed from head to toe in Islamic garb. She was covered. And she would come every Sunday to this church with a large, vibrant congregation. And she would take notes. She would walk around the church premises. She would spend a lot of time near the nursery, according to the security team there and what they told me. The nursery where there's children, dressed head to toe in Islamic garb, taking notes. Well, after a few weeks of this, the security team became a bit concerned. Some of the churchgoers were a bit concerned, a bit uneasy. And the security team approached her nicely and said, Miss, are you interested in becoming a Christian? Would you maybe like a Bible? And she said, no, I'm a Muslim. And I have no interest whatsoever in becoming a Christian. The natural follow-up question is, well, then why are you here? And why are you taking notes in front of the nursery? Eventually, they asked her to leave. The church did. And a few months later, something stunning happened. This young girl, she was 19 years old, Caucasian, Shannon Conley, an Irish name, I believe. She had converted to Islam, become radicalized online, and was communicating with ISIS fighters online. She agreed to marry one, and she was traveling to join him. She was arrested at Denver International Airport a few months after the church incident, the church prowling. She was arrested at Denver International Airport. She was on her way to join ISIS and marry an ISIS fighter. She's now serving 4 years in federal prison. We've seen many cases like that, a growing number of cases, where ISIS is finding vulnerable girls online. Young girls. And folks, let me tell you about how ISIS treats women. This is, again, this is a throwback to many centuries ago. Because when ISIS comes into a town, a village, a city, and the vanquished people are there, it's raping, it's pillaging. I document in my book the horrific stories from first-hand accounts, first-hand sources I've spoke to have been on the ground in Iraq and Syria, particularly in Iraq, and they've seen how ISIS treats the vanquished populations, where women and children are beheaded. It's really happening. It's not alarmism, it's not hyperbole. No, it's really happening right now in real time. ISIS has brothels in Syria where they take Christian women, Yazidi women, religious minorities who they have vanquished, and they turn them into sex slaves. Worse still is that at least one of the brothels in Raqqa, Syria, the capital of ISIS, is run by British women. God save the Queen. British women running an ISIS brothel, where when ISIS fighters come off the battlefield, they have sex slaves, literally, I don't use that term lightly, sex slaves waiting for them. This is happening right now. One more thing I have to mention about the U.S. threat before I move on a bit. The southern border. I've been told it's slightly porous. One of the most chilling conversations I had in the book was with a former CIA clandestine services officer. Now, this is a hardcore guy who's worked in hot spots around the world for 30 years. And he said, Eric, the thing that keeps me up at night is the possibility that an ISIS jihadist will smuggle a chemical or biological agent across that southern border. Folks, we could practically have a neon sign flashing, jihadist welcome, at our southern border. It's that appealing, it's that enticing. If we're shaking our heads about it, you know ISIS is nodding their head about it. They see. 13 and a half years after 9/11. and we still refuse to secure our borders. You cannot sustain yourself as a nation state and a free democracy if you refuse to secure your borders. You can't do it. So what are we doing about this threat as a country? I've laid out a pretty dire set of circumstances for you. This is no time to mince words. Somebody's got to say it. This is happening. If not us, who? And if not now, when? What are we doing about it? It's not going very well, folks. Let's start with President Obama. We could talk about this topic for a long time. Well, let me begin. Let's rewind to 2007, 2008. Now, whether you agree with the Iraq War or you disagree with the Iraq War, many opinions. One thing is certain. The U.S. troop surge worked. It worked. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was vanquished, crushed. Crushed. Fast forward to December 2011, and I have the timeline in my book. President Obama, against the advice of his top generals, withdrew every last U.S. troop from Iraq. Essentially declared victory. And folks, almost simultaneously, a wave of suicide bombings began. Assassinations of Iraqi leaders began. Terror attacks on Iraqi soil began. Al-Qaeda in Iraq rose again like jihadi vampires. And the attacks began on Iraqi soil. Then they spread their tentacles next door into Syria, took advantage of the civil war there. And it eventually became the beast we have today, ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Now, President Obama gets intelligence reports across his desk every morning. He was warned by bipartisan, whether it's military officials, diplomats, he was warned that Iraq was unraveling. He was warned. Yet, our president in January 2014 goes on national television and compares ISIS to a JV team. The JV team of terrorism. Pretty much waved them off, shrug of the shoulders, no big deal. Just a nuisance, a minor nuisance. Well, that minor nuisance right now covers 35,000 square miles of territory in the heart of the Middle East and rules over some 8 million unfortunate souls. That's no JV team. They're the richest terrorist movement in history. They have a standing army, practically. They have a state. JV. You thought it might get better after Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, was seized by ISIS. You thought we might get the memo and turn this thing around. Hasn't gone that way. There have been limited airstrikes, which have had some effect, by the way, but they're limited. And worst of all, folks, is President Obama's refusal to acknowledge the enemy. That gets to the heart of the matter. And I'm not trying to be a hyper-partisan. It is what it is. And what it is a refusal to even utter the words radical Islam or jihadists. You can't defeat the enemy if you can't identify the enemy. You can't do it. Obviously, not every Muslim is a terrorist. We know that. But obviously, there is a slice of Islam right now. A growing slice and a significant slice that are jihadists who want global domination. That's not alarmism. It's not racism or stereotyping as some on the left would have us believe. It's a fact. And if you're a truly moderate Muslim, you'll admit that. Daniel Pipes, a guy I respect a lot, Middle East historian, author, says that some 10 to 15% of the world's Muslims are radicalized, jihadists. That's at least, what, 160, 170 million people around the world. That's a lot of people. It's not a tiny minority of extremists. And we have to acknowledge that it exists. A global jihadist movement exists that has declared war on the United States. It's not just a criminal action or a nuisance that can be shrugged off and handled in federal courts. It's a war, and we're not on war footing. President Obama gave a speech recently saying that the Islamists have, quote, legitimate grievances. Legitimate grievances. Look, there's a lack of economic opportunity in the Muslim world, he said. And the lack of economic opportunity is driving terrorism and fueling the rise of ISIS. So I suppose the next big government program will be jobs for jihadists. Natural conclusion. Look, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, key takeaway from this talk. Terrorism is a tactic. It is fueled at the end of the day not by poverty, but by ideology. Ideology fuels the global jihad. It goes without saying that Osama bin Laden came from a multi-millionaire family. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the current al-Qaeda leader, came from a prominent Egyptian family, and he is a doctor, a medical doctor. Many Hamas leaders from prominent families, well-educated. The Muslim Brotherhood, they look like me. Suits, ties, Western educated. These are not some poor street urchins on the street corner out of a Charles Dickens novel. In America, we've had, in the West in general, Europe, America, we've had medical students. We've had business majors. We've had kids in their early 20s, late teens, not kids, young men and young women, from affluent suburban communities right here in the West, join ISIS. Not because of poverty or lack of opportunity, but because of ideology. And ISIS's success breeds attraction. So, if you want to know how we're doing against ISIS, we can't even call them who they are. This is the equivalent of during World War II, not being able to call Hitler and his hordes Nazis, or not being able to call the Soviets communists. It's insane. And folks, let me tell you, everywhere from Raqqa to Tehran to Gaza, the jihadists hear the president and his administration parsing their words and holding back, and they laugh. They laugh. The Islamic State is not Islamic? We literally have administration officials playing armchair imams and telling the Muslim world what is and what isn't Islamic. It boggles the mind, but it's happening. And in terms of fighting ISIS in the Middle East, we apparently believe now, and I hate to pile on, but this needs to be piled on about, because it's that bad. We apparently believe now, does our government, that Iran can be used as an ally and a counterweight to ISIS. Folks, let's get one thing clear. Iran has been the head of the global terrorist snake for 36 years. Whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and in some cases Al-Qaeda. Iran has fueled and driven this global jihad. Yes, Iran and ISIS are fighting each other right now in Syria and Iraq. Why? Not because Iran is suddenly some friend to the United States and the West. Not because Iran has reformed its ideology. Not because the mullahs have changed their spots. Because Iran and ISIS want the same thing. They both want to dominate the region and lead the global jihad. It's that simple. Yes, there's a Shia-Sunni divide, of course. Shias and Sunnis are killing each other across the Middle East. But when it comes to killing Christians and Jews, Shia and Sunni terror groups get along just fine. ISIS and Iran right now are battling each other for regional supremacy. Iran now controls 4 Arab capitals. They're not only in Tehran, Iran and its proxies control Sana'a in Yemen, Beirut in Lebanon, Damascus in Syria, Baghdad in Iraq. These are becoming Iranian satellites. They're increasing their influence across the region. And they're very close to a nuclear weapon. And we're bending over backwards to cut a deal. To the point where it's shameful as an American. I'll be honest. To see our government kowtow to a terrorist regime. Folks, you know we live in a world turned upside down when our administration reportedly is talking about sanctioning Israel, reportedly, yet wants to lift sanctions on Iran. We're in a world today where everything that's good is evil and everything that's evil is good. Iran is driving for a nuclear weapon. And apparently the West is going to accept it. Why should every American care about Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon? Why should everyone watching at home care about a nuclear-armed Iran? Again, it's over there. Why should we worry? It's thousands of miles away. Well, in addition to working on developing nuclear weapons, Iran is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could reach the east coast of the United States. It's not me saying it. Our own Pentagon released a report, either 2012 or 2013, saying that very soon Iran may have these long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach the east coast of the United States. Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia. Why would they do that? Why would Iran want missiles that can reach the United States? Why would they do that? They're our friend, they're our ally, peace in our time is at hand. The deal's coming. Why would they want missiles that could reach the United States? And why would they refuse, as part of these grand nuclear negotiations with the Iranians, why would they refuse to give up that missile program? That's off the table. They won't even talk about that long-range missile program. Why? Why aren't we pressing them on it? There's only one reason that you develop ICBMs, to mount them with a nuclear warhead. Only one reason. Iran considers the United States the great Satan, the Iranian regime. They call Israel the little Satan. Israel is a bump on the road to the ultimate prize, the United States. Now, if anyone watching thinks that, God forbid, if Iran got its wishes and wiped Israel off the map, if that happened, does anyone at home really, or in this room, really think that Iran would just pack up its bags and say, mission accomplished? No. Where will they go next? Israel is the first line of defense for Western civilization. And folks, if Israel goes down, eventually, we all go down. Don't kid yourself. The Iranian supreme leader, our partner for peace, recently called for death to America. As these nuclear negotiations are ongoing, the leader of Iran is calling for death to America. What are we doing? The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, said that these nuclear negotiations with the West are a form of diplomatic jihad. By jihad, he didn't mean spiritual yoga. I can assure you. What are we doing? So, let Iran and ISIS fight it out. But please, don't call Iran an ally. Don't do it. Don't try to recast history, current and former, and tell me this regime has changed its spots. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to ISIS, which is the subject of our talk, when it comes to this global jihad, this is a Winston Churchill moment. Think back to the late 1930s, early 1940s. Winston Churchill saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany. marching across Europe. He called it for what it was, and he knew what to do about it. He was bold, he was courageous. By the way, Winston Churchill also saw the Iron Curtain descending over Eastern Europe. He called it for what it was. Today, the only world leader that I see who sees the gathering storm of radical Islam, the global jihad, is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He knows the enemy. The first rule of war is know your enemy. He knows the enemy. I believe he knows what to do about the enemy. Yet, just like Churchill in the 30s and 40s, Netanyahu was being ridiculed, shunned, and marginalized by Western leaders who don't have the backbone to confront this existential threat and tell it like it is, and do what needs to be done. So what needs to be done? I've spent this evening laying out a pretty dire set of circumstances for you. As I said, the barbarians are not just at the gates, they are inside the gates. It's not fear-mongering. I've laid it out for you. I've laid it out in the book. And I've footnoted it copiously in the book. I've done my homework. I'm not just in an air-conditioned think tank in D.C. I'm getting on the ground. I'm talking to people. What do we do? Number one, in speaking to military strategists, pretty extensively about this ISIS threat, all of them shared a common theme. We can't defeat ISIS. There's one right there. Tell them I said hello. I'll acknowledge them in the book. We can't defeat ISIS through airstrikes alone. It can't be done. You need some sort of ground presence. Now, President Obama says again and again, the American people have no stomach for war. That may be true, but let me tell you something about the American people. If you lay out the case to them about an existential threat gathering at their doorstep that could kill their kids and their grandkids, all of a sudden their stomach will perk up. The American people have not changed. And if a threat is gathering, we want to confront it head on. And I'll tell you what, we need to do to ISIS, and this isn't simplistic and it's not trite how I say this, what we did to the German war machine and the Japanese war machine during World War II. Crush them. ISIS has declared a state in the heart of the Middle East, a caliphate, with 30 to 40,000 foot soldiers. We know where they are. We know their de facto capital is Raqqa in Syria. Crush them. They are evil. And if they had their way, they would take all of our heads off and they'd take our kids and grandkids with them. That's not hyperbole. When someone tells you they want to kill you, you should believe them and take them at their word. I believe ISIS when they say they want to kill me and cause chaos and havoc and bloodshed in my country. Crush them now before it gets bigger. Because ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you right now, not only is ISIS recruiting from around the world, but they're establishing satellites throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Pakistan and Afghanistan, we see ISIS presence. In Algeria, Libya, in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, in Nigeria, in the form of Boko Haram, a vicious, savage terrorist organization, which has pledged allegiance to ISIS. This thing is growing, ladies and gentlemen. Geographically, it's growing. The movement is gaining momentum. Crush it now. Crush it. And when you crush it, you will demoralize the global movement. You'll strike a blow against the grand caliphate. You'll strike a blow against the ideology. The ideology will survive, but man, it'll take a major hit. It'll take a major hit. This does not require a heavy U.S. footprint. Think back to 2001. Think of U.S. Special Forces, the CIA, on the ground in Afghanistan, working with the Northern Alliance. They routed the Taliban. We can do the same thing, folks, today in Iraq and Syria. We have the Kurds, who are fierce fighters, courageous, and pro-American, begging for our assistance, begging for leadership from the leader of the free world. Maybe a few weapons. Since ISIS is using US-made weapons that they seized from the Iraqi military. The Kurds, we have the Syrian Christians, we have some moderate Iraqi tribes who are all being enslaved and killed. They want to fight. They want to get rid of ISIS. They're begging for our assistance. We won't take the lead. It doesn't take a heavy US footprint. Again, Afghanistan 2001. It wasn't brain surgery. We got the job done. We can do that today, I believe. We need to do it because this thing is going to metastasize, and it is as we speak. It's not alarmism. It's reality. No one wants to be in the Middle East, obviously, but when a threat is gathering that seeks to destroy America, it must be dealt with. That used to be our philosophy. It affects all of us. One thing, smash the caliphate. Smash it, militarily. ISIS is not an 800-pound gorilla. A formidable foe, yes, in the Middle East. But when the US military puts their minds to something, they take care of business. They need the political will to get this thing done. I believe if President Obama laid out a compelling case to the American people about why we needed some ground presence in Iraq and Syria right now, and why we needed to snuff out this movement, crush it now, I believe the American people would rally behind it. I don't think it's going to happen though, folks. I don't think much is going to change before 2016. I hate to be a pessimist. Don't worry, I'm not an optimistic now. But I'm a realist. What would also be a beautiful thing, which I also don't think is going to happen, would be to see a true movement of anti-jihad Muslims, truly moderate Muslims who don't want Sharia, who don't want jihad. It would be a great thing. We should have a movement globally right now of millions of Muslims marching against ISIS, marching against jihad. We should have a million Muslim march on the National Mall. Guess what? We're not seeing it. Even after 9/11, Paris, Ottawa, Madrid, London, the rise of ISIS, we're not seeing it. I don't think we're going to see it. If we haven't seen it by now, I don't know that we're going to see it anytime soon. What more will it take? We've seen courageous individuals speak out, without a doubt. Courageous individual Muslims have spoken out against ISIS at great risk to their lives and their families' lives. In the book, I interviewed one in the Boston, Massachusetts area who came into the room, and I joked around with him. I said, "You look like Clint Eastwood." He had a poncho on, a disguise over his face, a wide-brimmed hat. And he said, "I can't show my face on camera. I'll be killed." Listen, Boston, Massachusetts, the liberal bastion of America. There's a fear factor there, in many cases. Bottom line is, it's not happening. If Muslims themselves aren't going to deal with this problem within, then we need to deal with it. Because it's targeting us. At the end of the day, for average Americans, just closing here, then we'll take Q&A. For average Americans, I've told you what the government needs to do, what it probably won't do. But average Americans need to do a few things. Number one, stay informed. You don't have to be a foreign policy expert, but you owe it to yourself, your kids, and your grandkids to take 10 minutes a day, follow on what's going on in the world. Look, after 9/11, there's no excuse. There really isn't. Be aware. Number two, get with like-minded people. Join EMET. Join with EMET, the Endowment for Middle East Truth. Get with organizations like this who care about this issue. Whether you like the Tea Party, whether you hate the Tea Party. Look, we can all agree, they made a difference. They made their voices heard. It was a bunch of like-minded folks who got together on particular issues, mostly economic issues. Let me tell you, this issue of radical Islam and jihad, to me, is a much more pressing and important issue. A movement that opposes radical Islam that supports Israel. Get with it. Get with that kind of movement. Get with like-minded people. The bad guys use social media. We can use social media to get with like-minded folks. Vote. That's very simple. And we take it for granted in our country many times. Vote. Someone, you don't agree with someone on this issue, how they're handling this issue, vote them out. And look, I work in Washington, D.C., the belly of the beast, and I can tell you, when you flood your congressman, your senator, when you flood their offices with phone calls and letters, guess what? They listen. They want to be reelected. They listen to their constituents. You can make your voice heard in that way. I'm telling you what you can do. At the end of the day, pray. At the end of the day, I believe, in this case and in every case, I think that prayer works. Take it from a guy who spent 5 months with ISIS, studying ISIS, researching ISIS, writing about ISIS. Pray. Now, I know this was a heavy message tonight, but speaking of praying, I'm going to reference the Bible. Very dangerous thing to do here in the Washington, D.C. area at times, but never stopped me before. The Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Okay, we're equipped now. We have the knowledge. Now what are we going to do about it? I challenge you and everyone watching at home to be watchmen and watchwomen on the wall for such a time as this. Again, if not us, who? These are the times. Thank you very much. Thank you. I can't get inside their heads. I can't speak for them. But is it a case of, look, they want to preserve their jobs in some cases? Perhaps. Also, in some cases, is it that maybe they ideologically don't see ISIS as the massive threat that it is? There could be a number of factors here. Again, I can't get inside their heads. I can't read their minds about why they're not speaking out. I can't do it. But some of the statements that have been made have alarmed me. In terms of downplaying, in our military brass as well, in terms of downplaying the threat. And that ISIS is not the major threat that it is. So I can't speak for them, to be honest with you, and I haven't interviewed any of the military current brass extensively, but it's something they'd have to answer, because we're not getting it done. Not for lack of effort, number one. We've had some luck, obviously. Think of the underwear bomber in 2009. Think of the Times Square bomber. The bomb didn't go off. So we've had some luck. But at the end of the day, let me tell you, in covering this closely, we've had great law enforcement and intelligence work. Without a doubt. God bless our agents, our law enforcement officers in the field. They've broken up many, many pots on U.S. soil. Dozens. So we've had great law enforcement intelligence work. We've had some luck. But ISIS is a different beast. And their pervasiveness now in the U.S. and the porousness, if that's a word, of the southern border, I think is a very makes America an even more inviting target. And again, new strategy, look, of course ISIS wants to top 9/11, without a doubt. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of them would love to pull off the next 9/11. But in the meantime, the strategy are these low-tech, self-starter style attacks, where you're a one-man or one-woman jihad. Death by 1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts. Chip away. And if you carry out these kind of attacks, you chip away at a country's economy, a country's psyche. I should have mentioned in my talk, I'll say it real quick here. Al-Qaeda in 2000 not released publicly, but they put together a 20-year plan. The plan ended in the year 2020, and it had 7 phases. The 5th phase, between the years 2012 and 2016, called for the establishment of a caliphate. Al-Qaeda said they wanted a caliphate between 2012 and 2016. Guess what happened in 2014? A caliphate was declared by ISIS. Right on course. Now the next phase between 2016 and 2020 is what Al-Qaeda called total confrontation. And remember, ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda. 2016 to 2020, total confrontation. So if ISIS has a network of supporters and sympathizers throughout the West, if they're gaining new affiliates throughout North Africa and the Middle East, if they're gaining more geographical ground in the Middle East, and if we refuse to confront them, they will confront us. Total confrontation. Seems to me that the plan is working out pretty well for them. Well, there's definitely, number one, Americans who've been arrested that are in prison now, who wanted to go overseas and join ISIS, sympathize with ISIS. So to me, they could absolutely be a problem if they get into the prison population. We've had a long run here over the past few decades of inmates in American prisons converting to Islam and becoming radicalized. That's a documented fact. So absolutely, with ISIS doing what it's doing, making such a big splash on the world stage, and doing it in such an audacious way, absolutely, people in prison, that's going to connect with not only people in prison, but radicals outside of prison. What they're doing is connecting with people in a major way. And the prison population, again, we've had cases where Muslim Brotherhood-connected individuals have served as prison imams and chaplains. So you have the fox guarding the hen house in many ways. So I remain highly, highly concerned about the American prison population and the possibility of further radicalization there. That's a great question.
Do you know if there's any actual documented?
I don't know of any concrete cases. I don't know of any concrete cases right now of ISIS activity in U.S. prisons, but definitely something to watch for, because there is a history there.
Yeah.
I think it's two sides of the same coin. I believe we must deal with ISIS because ISIS is showing a willingness and a desire to strike us here. So I think they have to be dealt with. I believe when a terror group, a terror movement, or a state, a terror state, expresses a desire, a willingness, and the ability to strike the United States, I believe we have to deal with it.
Iran already hit us on 9/11.
But on the flip side, I believe we also need to deal with Iran. As I mentioned earlier, Iran is the head of the terrorist snake. As a matter of fact, Iran is the greater long-term threat, without a doubt, than ISIS. ISIS, an immediate threat on U.S. soil because of that network of sympathizers and supporters. But long-term, if Iran gets the bomb, all bets are off. They will use it. Their ideology demands that they use the bomb. So I would deal with both. I'm not the president. I'm not a military strategist. But as a relatively informed American, I hope, deal with IS, deal with ISIS, deal with Iran. By any means necessary, do not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. Sounds maybe simplistic, but we don't want to snuff out the Islamic State, as you said, only to have Iran benefit. So I believe you have to deal with both, squeeze both. Perhaps you deal with the Islamic State first and you turn your sights to Iran. I'm not calling for perpetual war in the Middle East, but look, there are entities and states and groups right now operating in the Middle East who want to kill us and do great harm to us. I believe we need to deal with them and deal with them forcefully. Thank you for bringing that up. That was stunning, but not coming from this administration, not stunning. It wasn't stunning at all. We're talking about Iran and Hezbollah being removed from the terror list. And that I can assure you was not an oversight of me not mentioning it.
I didn't. I know.
Right, but Iran and Hezbollah recently being removed from the U.S. terror list. Now, the Obama administration says they no longer pose a threat, and they're changing their spots in essence. And Iran and Hezbollah can be used against jihadists like ISIS. That's basically official government policy right now. Again, Iran is the head of the snake. It's all there. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu laid it out in such a forceful, eloquent, compelling manner on Capitol Hill. There's not much that I can say that he didn't say already. He laid it out. The case was laid out years ago about this regime. The same mullahs who took over in 1979, they're there today, and their offspring. So Hezbollah is an arm of the Iranian regime, a creation of the Iranian regime. And by the way, something we didn't talk about as well that will require a whole other talk is Iran and Hezbollah's presence here in the Western Hemisphere. Iran has its tentacles throughout South America, Central America. Hezbollah operatives have been arrested in the United States. Why? Again, why would Iran and Hezbollah want a presence in the Western Hemisphere? Why would they want intercontinental ballistic missiles? Because they mean us great harm at the end of the day. And if they get the means to do it, they'll use it. It doesn't have to be conventional firing off a missile, intercontinental. It doesn't have to be that way. There's many ways Iran can strike the United States. And Hezbollah's proxy can strike the United States. We have the possibility of an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP attack, which Iran has studied and tested. Many possibilities. None of them good. There's two things I really wanted to get into in the book. And number one, you have a short amount of time. You're on a deadline. And you have a condensed period of time. There's so many things you want to get in there. The two things I really want to get in there are, number one, the Islamist influence in the education system. That's one of the things I want to get into, especially the universities.
Yeah.
And number two, which I want to mention real quick before I come back to the education system, ISIS's belief in Islamic prophecies. The Islamic prophecy angle, I think, is fascinating. ISIS believes right now that these are the last days, and that they are the guardians, the great warriors of the caliphate and of the apocalypse. And they believe there will be a showdown with the West in Syria one day, according to their interpretation of Islamic prophecies. Sunnis and Shias disagree on some things when it comes to prophecy, but ISIS believes that the last days are at hand. They are the vanguards of Islam, and they will lead the armies of Islam to victory over the West. And a climactic battle will occur in Syria, where ISIS controls 1/3 of the country right now. Wanted to get in the book, but since it didn't get in the book, I'm getting it out here for you now. Very interesting, we look into ISIS's ideology. It's an apocalyptic, prophetic ideology focused on Armageddon, just as the Iranian ideology, by the way. Different interpretations from the two sides, but same endgame. The jihadists win, and we die. Now, the education system. The universities have become a cauldron, number one, for rampant, vicious anti-Semitism. The American university system. It exists in our greatest institutions of higher learning, by the way. Not just some backwoods school. Division I excellent schools. Specifically in the UC, the California system, have become open hotbeds for anti-Semitism. Not only that, we have professors who are openly anti-Semitic in some cases, anti-Israel, anti-American for that matter. But the main thing on college campuses is the Islamic radicalism in many cases. There's a group I'm thinking of in particular, the Muslim Students Association, the MSA. It's a Muslim Brotherhood connected group, a radical group present on hundreds of college campuses, across the United States and Canada. The Muslim Students Association. So, big problem in the education system. Some of our textbooks at the secondary and high school level are whitewashing Islamic conquest and Islamic history. So, major problem. Maybe for another book. There is. I mean, there is. But we've shown in certain countries in the Middle East and North Africa and the Muslim world that when a regime is going to topple, we're not going to do much, maybe to stand in the way or to assist the more democracy-minded forces. Then Pakistan, to me, is one of the top 3 most dangerous issues right now. Because the imminent possibility for the past several years, it continues, that jihadists could overthrow the Pakistani regime and get a hold of those nuclear weapons. And then, look, we're talking Iran. You already have the Islamic bomb in Pakistan. And if jihadists seize Pakistan, all bets are off. To me, it's a massive threat, a cauldron. Of course, we're keeping tabs on it at the governmental level. I can't speak from first-hand experience there, but I would hope we're keeping tabs on it. But if the regime's going to fall, the Obama administration has seen various regimes fall, and Islamists come to power and gain strength, whether it's Libya, Yemen, Egypt, and they've done nothing to stop it. So I don't have great confidence that we do anything to stop the regime falling in Pakistan. I'm concerned about another thing to mention real quick. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. Are we gonna, I mean, Saudi Arabia right now is building a fence across its northern border with Iraq to keep out ISIS. Iran and ISIS are encircling Saudi Arabia and all that oil. They're encircling Jordan. They're encircling Israel, of course. What are we going to do? A few years ago, I'd say, oh my God, we'll never let Jordan or Saudi Arabia fall. Never. We can't. We have too many interests there, oil, everything else. With the way things have been going the past 6 years, expect the unexpected in the Middle East and in the Muslim world. Nothing is off the table. And nothing, that might, inside the Beltway, they won't tell you that. But I may work inside the Beltway, but I'm not of the Beltway. And I'll tell you, the Beltway style thinking, man, has gotten us in a pretty dastardly place right now in the Middle East. And General Sisi in Egypt, it must be mentioned. We're talking about, we're looking for moderate Muslim leaders to speak out. This is the one guy right now. And King Abdullah's had his back up, you know, after the Jordanian pilot was horrifically burned. But Sisi is a guy who's going out on a limb. And he's standing in Al-Azhar University in Egypt on New Year's Day, calling for a reformation in Islam. In a room, before a room full of imams and sheikhs. That's bold, that's courageous. A few days later, he goes into a Coptic church for the Coptic Christmas Eve celebration and stands with Coptic priests and says, we are all Egyptians. No Egyptian president has ever done that. Going into a church like that, publicly, boldly. He's gone on record time and time again. He's a man who's crushed, for now, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, largely. He's fighting ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. He's fighting Al-Qaeda. He's got a strong relationship with Israel, and he's cracking down on Hamas tunnels. This is the kind of guy we should be, and he's a practicing Muslim. This is the kind of guy we should be rallying around, right? You're not going to get any better in Egypt, folks. Thomas Jefferson is not turning around the corner in Cairo. You're not going to have a Jeffersonian Democrat in Egypt. But what you do have right now is a guy who opposes jihad, who has a good relationship with Israel, and is friendly to America. Yet we're isolating him, we're shunning him, and let me tell you, in my view, if the Obama administration, in a perfect world, the Obama administration would like to see Mohammed Morsi back in power. I say that without hesitation. A few weeks ago, we had a Muslim Brotherhood contingent at the State Department. The Muslim Brotherhood, the granddaddy of all Islamic terrorist groups. Folks, we would not be having this conversation about ISIS if it weren't for the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda, which came out of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the granddaddy of them all. It spawned Al-Qaeda, Hamas. It's the original modern Islamic terrorist movement. Yet they are now, along with Iran, our friends. And we have them at the State Department. And at the State Department, we have a Muslim Brotherhood delegation, some of them holding up the Muslim Brotherhood four-finger salute. ISIS has the one finger, the Brotherhood holds up four fingers. At the State Department, a terrorist group identified as such by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, other Middle Eastern countries. The Muslim Brotherhood are terrorists in suits. Same endgame though as ISIS, as I mentioned earlier. Tactics are different. The Muslim Brotherhood are like termites. They burrow into a host society and they eat away at it from within. ISIS wants to chop your head off now, kill you now. They make no bones about it. The Brotherhood is much more savvy, much more eloquent, much more stealthy. Same endgame. Two legs of the jihad. The violent jihad, ISIS, and the stealth jihad, the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but it needed to be said. Muslim Brotherhood, now our friends. Great questions. Two great questions. Number one with ISIS and the cyber jihad. Look, these are guys who I mentioned earlier are very savvy with technology, with the media, and they do have a cyber hacking team. Does ISIS? There have been persistent reports over the past few months that they're trying to hack in to the personal information of U.S. military personnel and U.S. law enforcement. To me, that's a very, very scary thing. They've actually published addresses of U.S. soldiers on the web. Are they the real addresses? Are they old addresses? Not quite clear, but the intent is there by ISIS absolutely to hack into sensitive, not only sensitive economic kind of sites, but also into the personal lives of U.S. soldiers. Because at the end of the day, you got to remember, why would they target U.S. soldiers? Because they view, the jihadists, they view the soldiers, U.S. soldiers, as the tip of the crusader spear. We're the crusaders in their eyes, the modern day crusaders. The defenders of the cross, as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, the caliph, has called America. They believe we're the modern day crusaders, and the crusader army is epitomized by the U.S. military. So every time, not every time, but many, many times when you see these ISIS plots broken up, they're targeting U.S. military installations when they're broken up here in the West. Many, many times targeting American soldiers, and in the cyber realm as well. I forget the second part of your question. I'm sure it was profound. Funding. It is profound. Funding. A few ways. Money makes the world go around, right? It makes the jihad go around too. A few ways. Private donors from the Persian Gulf region, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, etc. Private wealthy donors there who are sympathetic to the jihad, pouring money into Iraq and Syria, into the ISIS coffers. Another way they're doing it is by looting antiquities. Remember, this is the heartland of the Bible, Nineveh, where Jonah was. We have Jonah's tomb, the prophet Daniel's tomb in Iraq, and in some parts of Syria too, have some biblical significance. And what ISIS is doing, they'll go into museums, they'll seize antiquities, and they'll sell them. Another thing they're doing is they're just good old-fashioned pillaging. When they conquered Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, they conquered the central bank of Mosul. And at least $400 million ISIS took from that conquest. Then you have the illicit oil trade, where ISIS has conquered oil fields. They've seized oil fields in Iraq and Syria, and they're selling some of that oil on the black market in the Middle East, in Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran. And according to some accounts, they're making $2 to $3 million a day in this illicit oil trade. So lots of different kinds of revenue streams coming. That's a traditional thing. Look, you seize a town, you seize a village, you make them pay tribute. And you levy exorbitant taxes, especially on non-Muslims, the dhimmis. You'll levy an exorbitant tax on them as well. So multiple revenue streams, without a doubt. Can you wrap up, sir?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Erick Stakelbeck and all of you for coming. Erick Stakelbeck is an incredible friend. He is a voice of intellectual courage and moral integrity and of the truth of a man. And I'm honored and privileged to be his chair.